Story 1. The man who took a chicken wing, cut it in half and called it 2 chicken wings. Story 2. How has nobody mentioned diamonds yet? It is the most successful advertising campaign, at least. I do not think engagement rings have been a tradition for even 100 years. You can blame De Beers for that. Story 3. Scientology has to be up there. Seriously, these individuals generate billions of dollars annually. They charge thousands of dollars in membership fees and for progressing within the religion, which some people wealthy and gullible enough willingly pay. They have also become a tax-exempt religion. Their belief system sounds entirely false as well. While I firmly believe in the existence of alien life, I do not think they have any real connection to any religions, especially modern ones. Some aliens may have influenced a few religions in ancient times, but I doubt any of them are as directly involved with aliens as Scientology claims. Story 4. Education and textbook publishing in the digital age. They are making billions every year from something that should be completely digital. Talk about a powerful lobbying group. Story 5. The Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme involved approximately $65 billion over 17 years. He promised investors 9 to 10% returns annually but never invested the money. Instead, he paid the interest with other people's investments. He was well established on Wall Street and served on the board for the National Association of Securities Dealers Automated Quotations. He died in prison. 17 years was a long run, and the only reason he was caught was due to the housing crisis in 2008, when poor-quality AAA-rated mortgages failed. Story 6. The 18th century French government was known as the Ancien Regime. The remarkable aspect of the French Revolution was how long it took to occur. They transferred control of the royal mint, which managed the currency supply, to the people running the lottery. Each was used to finance the other, to the detriment of the country, except for the nobles. They used state funds to attempt to settle Louisiana. Comparing the size of the Louisiana territory with France shows how this drained the government's finances, leaving it powerless. About 1% of the population was defined as nobility. Nobles were exempt from taxes, sometimes received generous subsidies, were legally entitled to all top jobs, held property and hunting rights, and were immune to some laws. The other 99% of the population were ignored. This helps explain why people supported the guillotine. Story 7. Exempt workers. This means you do not receive additional pay for overtime hours worked. Story 8. Making people think the cloud is a magical place where your data is safe, when really, it is just someone else's computer. Story 9. Gregor McGregor's POI scam is one of the most notorious in history. Story 10. Successful? Not sure if this qualifies, but it definitely laid the foundation for many current scams. South Sea Bubble of 1720. The South Sea Bubble has been called the world's first financial crash, the world's first Ponzi scheme, speculation mania, and a disastrous example of what can happen when people fall prey to groupthink. That it was a catastrophic financial crash is beyond doubt, and that some of the greatest thinkers of the time, including Isaac Newton himself, succumbed to it is also irrefutable. Estimates vary, but Newton reportedly lost as much as £40 million in today's money in the scheme. But what actually happened? Story 11. It has to be Bernie Madoff. $65 billion in just 17 years. Story 12. Trickle-down economics and the idea that market forces are a replacement for regulation. Story 13. I am strongly opposed to our credit system that controls our lives and creates endless obstacles. Story 14. Offering a 6-speed gearbox in an underpowered 1.3-liter non-turbo engine car. Story 15. Landlords convincing the public that they are not the scum of the earth. Story 16. Men's and women's razors. Women's shavers are more expensive and of lower quality. Story 17. In terms of dollars, trickle-down economics is not close. Story 18. Scientology. A science fiction writer created a science fiction religion and it is still profiting. Story 19. American healthcare charged me $300 after insurance for one night in a hospital bed. No medical procedures were performed. That is when I realized they are scammers who get away with it because they give the government a cut. Story 20. Insurance requires you to pay a premium based on the full value of your house or car. Even as the value depreciates over time, the premium does not decrease, but the amount you receive does. Story 21. It might not be the case in the United States, but in the United Kingdom, electricity prices are extremely high. Here is the issue. The more people try to save money and reduce electricity use, the less profit energy companies make. So they raise prices and people try to cut electricity even more only to face higher prices again. Eventually, you are expected to live very frugally, but even then you have to pay an exorbitant standing charge to have the option of using power in the future. There is a regulatory body that sets a standard for the amount of power the average household needs, intended to counteract company greed and regulate prices to some extent. However, it appears to be so corrupt that the number they establish is unrealistically low, making it a laughingstock among other European countries and the world. Rant over. Story 22. Mormon culture. Despite being fraudulent, millions of people have been persuaded to give a lifetime of free labor in exchange for 10% of their gross income. It is the richest religion, in my opinion. Story 23. Cults. Most people do not even know they are a part of one. Story 24. Diamonds are fairly abundant, but they must be properly serialized by a monopoly-approved source for them to be worth anything. They are attractive but should not be nearly as valuable as they are. The sugar cartel in America and possibly other countries enforces laws that make it nearly impossible for competitors to open farms to produce and sell sugar. Sugar itself is not valuable, but we are led to believe otherwise due to normalized price gouging. Many medications are made from inexpensive ingredients but are sold at high prices because companies exploit laws securing their monopolies. Currency was originally intended to represent something of real value, but this is no longer the case. Much currency is based on trust rather than tangible assets. Additionally, authorities often print more currency, causing artificial inflation that acts as an invisible tax. Story 25. Insurance in general. Yes, you need another bank account. Story 26. The Paycheck Protection Program loans during COVID-19 were exploited by many wealthy individuals engaging in fraud. This may become the largest financial scandal in history. Story 27. Reduce taxes on wealthy individuals, and the benefits will gradually reach lower-income groups. Story 28. Mormonism is a fraud that has convinced millions to give them 10% of their gross income for life, as well as a lifetime of free labor. I believe it is the wealthiest religion. Story 29. Confiscated or seized assets. You get pulled over. A police officer finds money on you. The officer claims the money is drug money. You deny it. It does not matter. You have to prove it is not because money has no rights. It is not a person. You try to prove it is not drug money with receipts and other evidence. Police and courts often choose not to hear the case and ignore it, so they do not have to prove their reasoning. You lose the money. The department often keeps the money for their own use. There is nothing you can do. A streaming service actually has a movie that uses this as a plot line. While the movie is exaggerated, the confiscation and seizure of assets is based on real events. It happens all the time. Story 30. Federal income tax, or the Social Security Ponzi scheme. Story 31. The American Federal Reserve Bank is neither American nor federal, but a private bank with private, secret shareholders. It has never protected Americans from the bank panics that justified its creation. Yet it has existed for over 100 years, shapes monetary policy, and has the reputation of being a legal part of the United States government. This is a scam. Story 32. Joel Osteen and his ministry. He became a millionaire by telling people what they want to hear. Story 33. The Bernie Madoff version of the Ponzi scheme. He easily could have kept it going if the 2009 financial crash had not happened. Story 34. Credit card companies are allowed to charge 3 times the interest rate defined as unlawful usury under my state statutes. Story 35. Insurance companies train you to avoid making claims and to keep paying premiums. Story 36. Soft drinks, especially fast food soda. What does soda syrup and soda water cost? Couple of cents. but they mark it up 200 to 300%. Story 37. The distribution of land taken from Native American tribes by the United States government. Story 38. Banks lend money they do not have. The last time I checked, it was 10 times the amount they actually possess. The same applies to insurance companies. Story 39. Credit scores were not implemented until 1989. They are a legitimized way to encourage people to take on debt to get a better score and ultimately take on more debt. Story 40. Running for president to funnel donation money to your own accounts and services. Story 41. Trickle-down economics is the theory that giving wealthy people more wealth will lead them to be generous and share some of it with workers. It sounds far-fetched to me, but they have managed to convince hundreds of millions of workers to support it for the last 40 years. Story 42. The diamond industry convinced people that diamonds were rare and valuable. Story 43. Housing in Canada. Seriously, housing is going to be feudalistic in a quarter of a century. Story 44. Getting rid of pensions and tying Americans' retirements to the stock market. Story 45. After religion, after convincing regular people that billionaires are good for society, and after convincing Americans that getting financially hurt on healthcare is top-tier healthcare, there were Paycheck Protection Program loans. It was a heist using the pandemic to funnel money from the public to the rich. Story 46. Most successful? I don't know. But certainly one of the most legendary is the story involving a huge wooden horse. Story 47. Cryptocurrency. You give me your real money, and in turn I will give you this virtual currency. In the future, you can sell it back for large real money profits. This real money comes from other cryptocurrency participants. Eventually, when everyone wants to withdraw their real money, there is not enough actual money to pay everyone, and the entire scheme collapses. It is essentially a pyramid scheme. Story 48. That Coca-Cola had any intention of continuing to make new Coke. They just needed enough time to replace the sugar in old Coke with corn syrup and for people to forget what it really used to taste like. Story 49. Probably the Native Americans. They lost everything and now live on reservations on what used to be their land. Story 50. The best scams no one has ever heard about. If you know about a scam, it has failed. Story 51. Insurance is not just a legal scam, but illegal if you refuse to be a victim. Story 52. An orange man convincing half the country that he is not a scoundrel. Story 53. Easily and by far it is organized religion. Special shout out to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the Church of Scientology, the most deceptive of the group. Story 54. Catholicism teaches the practice of tithing, where individuals give 10% of their income as a contribution to the church. Story 55. Watch Trust No One. The Hunt for the Crypto King on Netflix. Story 56. Convincing corporate America that money is more valuable than time. Story 57. For indisputable scams, Bernard Madoff's Ponzi scheme, which lasted 17 years and was worth $17 billion, is one of the most notable. Story 58. Not your faith. When you think of God, when you pray, you feel something. That is your faith. It is an internal but very real phenomenon, and I would never argue that it is not real. But then comes a person, usually a man, who tells you that this feeling is caused by his God, the one he believes exists. He convinces you that you should follow his God. Over the years, that man and his successors contribute to a body of rules. Things you should do, things you should not do, what to eat, what not to eat, and most dangerously, who to love and who to hate. That is organized religion. Its existence divides us as a species. It gives excuses to our primitive primate desire to divide everyone into us and them, and then war with them to take their resources. It always seems that the people who study and teach these rules can come up with reasons why they should be in charge of everything. Story 59. The television executives who convinced the world that Donald Trump was a successful business genius. Story 60. Diamonds are extremely common yet also very expensive. We are led to believe diamonds are a rare luxury material when in reality they are just carbon. Story 61. Christianity, you are born already in debt to God. No matter what you do, you will never be able to pay that debt. Story 62. Religion is a belief system in which people are convinced that an invisible deity loves them very much and will punish them unless they show devotion and offer financial support. Story 63. Food pyramid. Turn it upside down. Now you have something. Story 64. Organized religion is the belief in an invisible old man who lives in the clouds, sees everything, has complete power over everything, and decides where you spend eternity after life. If you give the religion's leaders money, they will put you on the fast track to heaven. Meanwhile, you are not allowed to ask why children get cancer, why people starve, or why there are wars. It is a criminal fraud based on primitive and ignorant ideas. Other than that, I have no opinion. Story 65. Large banks that are too big to fail received a substantial government bailout, and nothing changed. Story 66. Car registration cost in Michigan based on original manufacturer's suggested retail price and no-fault insurance. Story 67. Whoever convinced all of the law enforcement agencies that they could not do their jobs with sedans anymore, and now it is essential to have twice as expensive, fully equipped sport utility vehicles. Story 68. Central banks charge interest on money that never existed in the first place. Story 69. Insurance was created to scam patients out of more money to pay doctors higher wages. The biggest part of this scam is that oppressive governments force people to have insurance, especially in countries where the Constitution prohibits forcing citizens into anything except maybe taxes. Story 70. The two-party system in government involves two highly polarized parties that people have to choose from. Although an independent candidate or another option could run, they usually lack the money or connections to be a legitimate choice. Therefore, this system effectively leaves voters with only two parties, even if both are unsatisfactory. Story 71. Mitigation of black marks leading to hell through donation to the Catholic Church. Story 72. Read about a man who ran a parking lot in a major city for 20 to 30 years. He worked 6 days a week and then suddenly vanished one day. It turned out that he did not work for the owner of the parking lot. All that tax-free money accumulated over the years. The man is a legend. Story 73. Universities are making enormous amounts of money and putting young people into lifelong debt for degrees that do not qualify them for a job. Story 74. The skincare industry is deceptive. Obviously, you should take care of yourself, and your skin is part of that. However, your skin is a highly complex organ that has evolved over millions of years to regulate itself. You do not need hundreds of dollars worth of products or a 7-step skincare routine. It is a $50 billion a year industry. No one will ever convince me otherwise. Story 75. The United States two-party system makes people choose between two candidates instead of allowing anyone to have a chance. Story 76. A carpetbagger millionaire from New York, pretending to be a billionaire, who cheated on every wife and scammed people through his companies for decades, convinced a large majority of Southern evangelicals that he has their best interests in mind. Story 77. Insurance is essentially a bet that you will have an accident. If you do not have an accident, the insurance company keeps your premium. However, if you do have an accident, you receive a payout. Story 78. Cigarettes were sold to women as part of the liberation movement to make them feel empowered. Story 79. A long-running scam in politics that I suspect has been going on since the Sumerians is bigoted citizens throwing their support behind a right-wing politician who promises to persecute marginalized minorities but also implements policies that harm the interests of those bigoted citizens. Those bigoted citizens either do not notice or do not care because they are gullible and inattentive. We see this with former President Trump supporters in the United States, but I have noticed a similar thing happening in Russia, China, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom. Right-wing voters rarely pay attention to the substance of what lawmakers are doing and keep supporting right-wing politicians so long as those politicians keep saying what their voters want to hear. Story 80. Organized religion convinces common people that there is a glorious place waiting for them after death and that they can go there if they behave while they are alive. Conversely, it convinces them that an eternity of suffering awaits them after death if they do not behave while alive, so they will be too scared to act up. Story 81. Arm & Hammer Baking Soda. Keep your drains and garbage cans fresh by using the product appropriately. Story 82. There was once a man who stood outside a zoo for many years selling parking tickets. The zoo became accustomed to him being there. Then one day, nearly 20 years later, he did not come for the first time in years. The zoo called the parking company, and the company said there was never a man authorized to sell tickets. Turned out that man made millions of dollars selling fake tickets. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.